Because reading is what?
Fundamental! Before we start, no, your eyes aren't playing tricks on you. This stack is tilted, and I can't figure out why, so we're just gonna ignore it. Focus on me. Ignore that. Me. Good. Okay, let's start. Hello my lovely friends and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Joanna, but you can call me Jo. Today, we have a fun one. I'm going to be spilling the tea.
Why are you gay?
I'm going to be essentially telling you all my tips and tricks to help you become a reader, or if you were once a reader but are struggling to get back into it, I'm also going to be talking about that. So hopefully I can be of help today. I think in general getting into reading or getting back into reading can be a very daunting thing to even attempt to do, and whilst the book community is typically nice and warm and accepting, there are some snobs
I feel very attacked!
that do make it a bit of an intimidating space to get into. So hopefully with my tips and tricks you will feel a bit more at ease and actually feel a bit more encouraged to try and enjoy reading. Reading shouldn't be a chore, it should be enjoyable, so we are going to focus on things that make that experience fun. If you've clicked on this video, then you've probably said to yourself, I want to start reading but I don't know how. That's what we're going to tackle today, and hopefully you've come to the right place. A year ago I was not much of a reader. I would try, but I would never be able to finish a book. So a year later I want to sit down and share with you some of the things that have actively helped me to keep reading and actually finish books.
Dude, we are so gonna party! Yeah.
Also, I've been very silly and decided to film during a heat wave, so if you see mustache sweat, no you didn't, keep it to yourself, I don't want to hear it. And I apologise if I go red at any point in this video. I am dying.
This is hot, but it's not good.
Now that we've got that out of the way, let's begin. This is my evidence, the proof that I have been reading every day for more than a year now. Humble brag, I know. Essentially, I'm really trying to highlight the importance of habits. Without habits, you're not going to be able to do something like this. Not that you have to read every day, but if you wish to, making good foundations and habits will get you there. If you're anything like me, you probably were a reader when you were a child, and you look back now and think, how on earth did I read that much that quickly?
I don't understand, bitch. I don't understand.
I'm in the same boat. Maybe you continue to read as you got older, but with school and life and just other stresses, it probably took a backseat as it did with me. Eventually you find yourself becoming the I haven't read for years person, and from then on you just kind of give up and you can't really be bothered to try anymore.
I do that.
I've had a few people in my life and online ask me how I got into reading and how I read so much, and the honest answer is my therapist. Not exactly, but yes, kinda. I was explaining to him last year that I felt that I never went through with things. I would say I'd do something and just not do it. I am a quitter by nature. I love to not finish things.
I quit!
And he turned to me and asked me if there was something I wish I hadn't given up on. I said cocaine.
Please don't do cocaine! Hey! Cocaine ruin your brain! What? Please don't do cocaine! Hey!
I, of course, said reading. I told him that my partner said that he was wanting to read a book a month, and that had really inspired me to get back into reading. He pretty much stopped me on the spot and said,
No, you won't do that.
Because it's a chore. And I was like, oh, okay, tell me more. The next thing he said changed my life. Not really, but it really fucking helped. My first tip to getting back into reading:
That's not actually my tip, it's my therapist, so thank him.
read 5 pages a day. I know it sounds so simple, but I found it really works for my brain. The idea is to take baby steps but also be intuitive and know what you want. Regardless of how you're feeling about a book, read 5 pages minimum. If you get to the end of those 5 pages and you don't wish to continue, that's fine, you can carry on tomorrow. Even though it's such a small thing, you still have achieved a goal, so you feel proud of yourself, and that extra boost of motivation will help to keep you showing up.
Hi, baby girl.
This was definitely a good way for me to ease myself back into reading because it wasn't a humongous task. I just had to sit down and read 5 pages. Easy. The 5 pages a day minimum isn't a limiting thing, it's actually quite flexible.
That, I can go lower.
Bro, that is badass.
because it puts you in control. You don't need to just read 5, you read however much you want. I found that once I had made time to sit down, I wanted to keep reading, because even though 5 pages for a new reader feels like a lot, by the time you're done with them, you might already be invested and you want to keep reading. And that's what I found. Some days I would read 5, some days I'd read 100. And with this simple method, I managed to finish books, which I hadn't done in years. Reading shouldn't be a chore. It should be something you do in your spare time out of enjoyment. So figure out what works for you.
Can I get an amen?
The 5 pages really work for me, and they have revolutionized how I read. Reading is such a personal and intimate experience that I think fundamentally you really have to know yourself, because then you can set yourself goals that are achievable instead of competing with others and finding yourself left behind because you can't keep up. It's not a race. You just have to read in a way that works for you. These next tips I don't really have an order for. I just think that they are things that enhance the reading experience and that have really helped me, and hopefully they'll help you too. I'm a firm believer that nostalgia makes the world go round. So my second tip, reread the books you read when you were a reader. However, if you have never been a reader, then I would suggest reading books about certain topics that you know well. Comfort is a huge deal when trying something new. It's a lot easier to do so with material you are familiar with. I found that when I went back last year and reread the Fallen series, which is a steaming pile of trash, I will admit, I still had a really fun time because I remembered the story and I still found myself gravitating towards the characters because I had such an attachment to them when I was younger. It also typically involves easier language to understand, which makes the reading experience a lot easier as well. This sometimes can backfire because you go back and realize this is shit. Why was I reading this? Why did I like it so much?
This is the worst.
However, I do think you can still have fun with it, and at least you're reading.
I rest my case.
Most of the time, viral books tend to be quite solid works of literature that are made for the masses anyways, so you should indulge in those books because you will find what works for you. There is something for everyone. Book Talk is a great tool, of course, which encourages discussion and recommendations, and you'll be certain to find something that fits your need. Plus, by engaging with these books, you will probably find people within your own life that have also read them. I think this is an integral part to the reading experience, being able to discuss your views and opinions with someone else. The possibilities are endless because you can then start a book club, you can then buddy read. There's a lot you can do with that simple connection. Just by that, you are engaging in what it's like to be a reader, and that will probably help you to keep showing up because your friend might give you recommendations, and if they don't, that's okay because Book Talk will. Before you know it, you're taking these recommendations and look, you're reading.
Yup.
In a similar vein, book to movie adaptations are such a fun way to get back into reading because you can dissect 2 types of media in one go. It also means that you'll have the pleasure of playing
Every obnoxious reader's favourite game.
which is better, the book or the movie. Genuinely, most of the time, the book is better. And the biggest reason for this is because of how your brain depicts the words on the paper, which makes reading so fun because you are literally soaking in the information
And adding a picture to that.
Can you believe?
However, obviously when it comes to watching a movie adaptation, sometimes that can backfire because the director doesn't have the same image you have in your brain. I find that reading is a much more immersive experience because you are the one seeing things. Which is so cool. You're literally like reading and tripping at the same time without taking drugs. Thank you.
What? Oh man, this is some good acid. What am I saying?
I do find that I've had both experiences where I have read something and I imagine it very vividly in one way. I go to see the movie adaptation and it's exactly the same. That is such a good feeling. On the other hand, I've definitely had moments where it's totally different from how I envisioned it and it kind of puts a damper on things. It's always good to have an open mind, and when it works, but if it doesn't, it's still fun to make fun of, you know? For example, did I enjoy It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover? Not immensely. Do I want to watch the movie? Not really. Will I check it out just to make fun of how bad the adaptation is going to be? Yes, I am, because it's fun. So I think as long as you find little alleyways of enjoyment within the activity of reading, you'll have a good time and you'll keep showing up. The good thing is that you're absolutely spoilt for choice. Originality is really hard to come by these days, and the machine we call Hollywood loves an adaptation because it already has a preformed audience. So there's probably more book to adaptation movies than you realise, and maybe, just maybe, one of your favourite movies could be based on a book, which would make it an interesting read.
If I had a mic right now, I'd drop it.
It's all about the alleyways, babe. If you don't take anything from this video, take that. It's about you. Figure out what works for you. Excuse me. Do I have another one?
Disgusting!
Anyways, my next tip is a pretty standard one, kind of obvious, but I do think it's an important one to bring up in this conversation. Go to the local library.
What's up with all these books?
I think through the lens of social media and the kind of cultish book talk idealization, the aim seems to be to own a humongous collection of books and then display them on a lavish bookshelf. Mine doesn't really fit that category, and that's okay.
I have personality, you know, I have style, you know, I have class, and I'm just me, and I'm real.
She's only Whittle. It's fine. It's okay. She's my baby. I protect. And of course, whilst that is a want, I mean, who doesn't want a huge library with a ladder? That's the dream. It's definitely not something I or most people can achieve. So I think it has created a bit of a skewered notion of what being a reader should be, and that's not it. Instead of buying books, borrow them. Plus, with the time limit, it might actually encourage you to read a bit faster. Although from experience, it does tend to be a bit pressure-inducing. So I would suggest if you can't manage to finish it within that time, just extend it. Another positive aspect of libraries, they can actually be a hub for readers like you, and they can create a good sense of community, which could provide the encouragement you need to keep showing up and keep reading. I know most people probably think of libraries as old people's spaces. I've been there, I thought that too, but honestly, they tend to keep up with the times. My local library has a massive collection of books, including the viral ones that everyone talks about online, and if they don't have it within the library at that moment, they might be able to advise you as to where you can find it in other libraries. Honestly, it's a win-win for all, and you're getting a much more achievable version of reading, which I think should be encouraged, and I think would work very well for someone trying to get into it for the first time. Similarly, thrift stores and charity shops are your friends. You can find some amazing things.
Get in, loser, we're going shopping.
I've noticed there's usually a really good mix of trendy books, classics,
and then you have some really obscure books that you have never heard of that sometimes tend to be the best book you'll ever read.
I find that this really keeps the excitement about reading alive. Granted, it might just be because I love a bit of retail therapy and I love books.
Get a life, nerd.
You never know what you might find when you walk in. How exciting is that? That's so much fun. Even without the factor of the unknown, you still feel good because you're saving so much money and you're doing it, usually, for a good cause. Most of these books on my bookshelf have been £1.
Amazing. Thank you.
And sure, aesthetically, they might not be in the best condition, but at the end of the day, it's the same words for a fraction of the price, and it just kind of reminds you that reading doesn't have to be expensive.
Yes, Gaga! Slay, mama!
I've mentioned the word community a few times, so you can probably guess where I'm going. Book club. I'll hold my hands up and be honest, I have never actually successfully been in a book club. A friend of mine and I tried to do over the phone one once. I mean, it was good, we did it. Melly, if you're watching, love you, but we didn't get very far. So I do think they are best when they're done in person. In theory, meeting people who have similar interests can really go a long way. Naturally, as humans, we want to talk to people and we want to discuss our opinions, and book clubs encourage that. They really want to dissect how you view the book. They provide a safe space for you to speak your mind. It doesn't have to be a scary thing. If you don't feel comfortable going out of your way and essentially meeting strangers, that's okay. Maybe do what I try to do, ask a friend, see if they'd be down, and you can just have nice little book club sleepovers or something, you know? Baby steps to get to where you want to get. On the other hand, if you do not wish to leave the house as often as I am suggesting, right there with you, I barely leave the house. Social media might be the way to go. An obvious answer, but there's a reason it's used in this way. Find book creators that you trust and that you jive with what they read. I think that really is essential for a good sort of symbiotic relationship between you and the creator. I know for me personally, with Cindy, love her. I would watch her videos even before I was a reader because I just liked how she discussed things, and that itself is engaging. And then when she actually recommends books and I like them, that's double the engagement, and I love her so much more for that, you know? I'd also include within this tip bookish apps such as Goodreads, Storygraph. Here you can keep track of your reading, and you can even follow creators if they have an account and see what they're reading, but also you can add your own friends. So again, it does go back to a sense of community without having to leave the house. It's such a great way to get recommendations, but also be a part, and or if you're like me and kind of like to take a back seat, you can just witness the discussions that other people are having surrounding specific books. I'd suggest giving audiobooks and ebooks a try. I'm definitely more of a physical book girly. I love the feel, I love the smell, and I just prefer to hold the book. But I think for someone who isn't inclined to pick up a book, these are really good alternatives. Audiobooks allow you to continue with your life, whereas I look at how much time I spend reading and I could be doing so much more if I just picked up an audiobook instead. In terms of ebooks, I've heard that they make the process of reading a lot quicker. Plus you can personalize the experience and adjust the settings so that it's perfect for your eyes. Sometimes I get really annoyed by how small the font is in a book, and I know that if I were to read an ebook, I can literally make it bigger if I wish. And if you're not a big fan of the font, you can change that too. Like, it's literally personalized to fit you. Ebooks literally eliminate any irritation or icks that you can get from physical books, which I think is a huge plus. With this in mind, it might make the experience of reading a lot more fun, which will get you reading a lot more. I remember when I was in high school and I went through my Wattpad phase. I read a lot of fan fiction. Like, a lot. Slut. I made the screen black and the writing white, really helped my eyes not get tired, and I would read at like 4 in the morning. I found that I would literally fly through books with such ease. So overall, for beginners, it might create a better experience. These next few tips are things that I personally do to make the experience of reading a lot more enjoyable for myself, and whilst they won't be a trigger to help you start reading, they might encourage you to keep showing up. Certainly an intuitive tip that I think a lot of people don't really acknowledge is making yourself comfortable. Your environment really affects you, and if you create a safe little nook that you dedicate just to reading and you feel comfortable and you're surrounded by warmth and coziness, you might be surprised at how much more you crave a little sit down with a book. I have a specific sofa that I love to read in because it's comfortable, but this is going to sound really odd, but it also has quite wide arms, so my cat can come and join me and she'll lay down and purr in my ear whilst I'm reading, and it's just the perfect environment for me to read in. It feels very serene and I can actually take time to breathe and be mindful. Once you've achieved that lovely calm environment, you'll realize your brain can really focus on the words that you're reading, and it makes the experience way better. You don't have to be fancy or create a secluded area. As long as you're comfortable, your brain will send you signals of enjoyment, which will then keep you showing up. That's what it's all about. My next tip might not be for everyone, but it's one of my favourite things to do when reading, so I thought I'd share it with you. I love going on Spotify and searching for specific playlists of the book that I'm reading, so I typically just put the title of the book and a bunch of playlists will come up. Essentially, other readers have created a playlist of songs that they think match the vibe of the book. I find that listening to those songs really immerses me in the reading experience, and it creates a tangible sense of the world within the book. It also really helps with the element of escapism, because typically the songs in the playlist are songs that I have never heard before, so I can really focus on listening to them on a general level whilst really digesting the words and the book.
Did you know that you were insane and nothing that you said ever made any sense to me? Yep.
Like I said, I know it's probably not something that works for everybody because some people really just can't have distractions when reading, which is totally fair enough. But if you can read whilst listening to music, give it a try and see how you feel. Now, I need you to stick with me on this one because I know it sounds silly, but like most things, it turns out things are a lot more fun when you romanticize them. Essentially, fake it till you make it. Indulging in your delusions sometimes really allows you to do the things you want to do. If you tell yourself,
yeah, I'm a reader and I have amazing taste,
I'm sure eventually you'll get to the point that you will start picking books up and you will realize,
maybe I do have good taste. Wow, the land of make-believe.
And if you're feeling extra crazy, you might even picture yourself as the main character. It works! I'm telling you, it works. And I know it sounds stupid. But when it works, okay? Trust me on this one.
The prophecy is true.
In a weird, twisted way, by doing this, you are actually practicing mindfulness. And you're also taking time to be present and enjoy the moment. It might even make the process of reading
fun and lighthearted,
because you could be reading something that is absolutely dog shit. But by being in this mindset of, I'm having a good time, I'm reading, I'm loving it, you might find yourself still enjoying it despite knowing that it's bad. And I think that is a good roundabout way of getting into reading, even if it sounds questionable. It's good on a fundamental pure enjoyment basis.
Sure, Jan.
I'm a very visual person, so I need to physically see my progress. I've mentioned already in the video about the fact that you can track your progress online and you can see the percentage of how much of the book you have already read, and that really helps me. But I find that doing that alongside an old-fashioned bookmark does wonders. By seeing the marker slowly make its way towards the finish line, that creates a big fire within me of, okay, I'm so close, I just gotta keep going. And it helps me feel intrinsically motivated by something that I'm seeing visually. So it kind of works on all levels for me. But that could just be me, I don't know. But bookmarks are a good thing to have and they're a good place to start, I think. Yeah, I would suggest that anyone watching this starts to keep a stack of books that you've read. Again, it's a very visual element. I found that this very simple action of creating a little stack has really helped me to read more, because every time I finish a book I can just run to my book stack and add another one, and again it goes back to the visualization. I'm literally seeing how much I've read in the year, and it's just very rewarding. And an additional plus to this is the fact that it looks really visually aesthetic. Whenever you have visitors come over, they typically point it out and say,
wow, who's been reading this much?
You can then say,
this guy.
And you can start having a discussion about books, which again keeps the flow of you being a reader alive, because you start to communicate with other people about books. Big brain. Now that I've mentioned my tips and tricks to get you into reading, I really want to talk about things that I would avoid as a beginner reader. Some of these things I do, but considering how long I've been reading, it makes sense for me to do them, but I do think they could be a hindrance to someone who is just starting out. So, the first thing that falls into this category is having a book on you at all times. I think this is the piece of advice that I hear the most, and whilst I think it works for established readers, I think it creates a certain amount of pressure for someone who's just starting out. I remember I used to try and do this and I would end up resenting the book that I had in my bag. It wasn't an engaging way to really immerse myself in the book, because really I didn't have enough free time when I was going somewhere to really understand and enjoy the book. There was always too many distractions, and most of the time I'd have to reread certain passages over and over again because I wasn't fully there. It simply wasn't an environment that allowed me to concentrate. It made reading feel more like a chore that had to be fit into my schedule rather than something that should be savoured and enjoyed. Anything that is designed to be savoured shouldn't be rushed.
Just calm down. Like, chill.
It's okay to give up on books. You intuitively know when you're not vibing with something, and honestly, life is too short to spend time on books that you're not enjoying. I am guilty of doing this, as I think most people are. I'm super nosy and I just like to know how things end. However, I can admit most of the time it's not worth my time and I just end up hating the book, and then I'm in a reading slump. And I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes reading slumps are harder to get out of than getting into reading in the first place, you know? It's just not worth ending up in a reading slump, in my opinion. If you're a beginner reader and you have guilt for giving up on books, throw that out of the window. There's no guilt here. Another thing to avoid when you're trying to get into reading...
Wait for it.
Wait for it.
Wait for it.
Wait for it.
Distractions, obviously. Reading is typically something that really demands your attention, so being surrounded by distractions probably won't help you to really focus on the book you're reading. The other week I filmed a video where I swapped my screen time for book time, and honestly I think that would be a really interesting way to get a beginner reader into the flow of reading. The brain sometimes needs a challenge to really make things exciting, especially with something like reading, which can be such a mundane thing. I think it would be an interesting idea to spice up the way you read and create those little challenges for yourself and see what you can achieve. Probably one of my biggest tips would be to avoid classics. Avoid. They're amazing for what they are, but they are not beginner friendly, period. They're definitely not the most accessible in terms of language, and also they can be a bit old-fashioned in terms of the views that you are reading, and sometimes you just don't jive with that, you know? So it's always better to start with something a bit more contemporary that feels like the world we live in. To start off with, I would absolutely avoid annotating. I love that people annotate, and I think it's such a cute little sub-genre of reading, but it's certainly not for me. I feel like it feels like a task, it feels like schoolwork, and fundamentally I think it's really important for you to enjoy reading first, and then you can start adding these cute, quirky, personalized experiences to make the reading more you. It feels unnecessary to put that pressure on yourself when you're just starting out.
What was the reason? What was the reason?
Also, sometimes you just don't know what to say, you know? Sometimes you just want to read, digest, and not have to think. One of my very big no-nos, and again, it might work for some, it certainly doesn't work for me, is reading multiple books at once. I cannot do it. I used to read 4 or 5 at once when I was in high school, and I'd get the plots mixed up, I'd forget characters, and it just wasn't a good way for me to read. It's always best to keep your mind clear and focus on one book and one storyline and really dive into that book first. It's a good habit to create and stick to because I reckon it would just be very overwhelming to try and read multiple stories at once. I've been saying it this whole video, so you probably knew this was coming at some point. Start small. By that I mean small increments and also small books. I love big books, and I've certainly gotten over my big book fear, and genuinely, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I do think that sometimes they are more engaging than shorter books because they need the reader to really be captivated to keep reading for that amount of time. However, I do think they would be way too overwhelming for someone who's just starting out. Short and snappy is the way to go. And lastly, the biggest thing that I would avoid as a beginner reader is comparison. Don't be annoyed at yourself if you're struggling to get into reading. It's a difficult thing to do and it requires time and patience, and it's a skill. It's so easy to see others read so much and feel inadequate. Remind yourself that most of the time these people's reading habits are not achievable and they only work because of someone's lifestyle. I know that for me, if I worked full time, which I have done, I definitely didn't read as much then in comparison to how much I read now. It's all about perspective. It's a very personal thing to read and know what you enjoy reading, and that takes time because you have to experiment and you have to figure out what works for you. I know I've said this many times, take a shot every time I say it, but it's about you, so you need to fundamentally know what works for you. I certainly hope these tips and tricks and habits help, but please do not be disheartened if they don't. This is what works for me, but reading is not one size fits all. Getting into reading can be very overwhelming, but I think the most important thing is to be kind to yourself and know that it's not a competition. I'm really intrigued to see if these tips work for you guys, because I found that they have really allowed me to enjoy the pleasure of reading. But like I said, it might not work for everyone, but I really do hope it does. Fingers crossed. With that being said, I'd love to hear your personal tips and tricks as to how you got back into reading, and I'd love to know the thing that really worked for you. Leave it down in the comments. I'll be sure to check out what everyone's saying and apply that to my own way of reading. Please do leave me a like if you enjoyed the video, it really does help. Subscribe if you want, and ring the bell for notifications for when I next post. Let's get reading, gang! Alright, love you all. Read some books. Hopefully this helps. If it doesn't, it's fine. Figure out what works for you. Take a shot.